In my previous life, both Jason's childhood sweetheart and I were kidnapped at the same time. Jason chose her. I was humiliated to death, and then I was reborn, right on the day he proposed. Jason was passionately kissing Tiffany, holding her tightly like a treasure he'd just gotten back while breaking up with me. He told me he would never let go of Tiffany's hand for the rest of his life. I nodded and agreed, then turned around and married the man who had avenged me in my previous life. On our wedding day, Jason said he must have been blind. He begged me to turn around and look at him just one more time. My possessive new husband pulled me into his arms and said, "My wife doesn't take back the trash, huh?" Jason said, "Lena, let's break up. I finally see it now. I've always loved Tiffany." He held Tiffany's hand tightly, his eyes full of emotion, but when he spoke to me, his tone was cold as ice. I simply nodded and said, "All right." Just 10 minutes ago, I was reborn, and now it seems Jason has been reborn too. In my last life, Jason and I were in a relationship for 5 years and married for 10. Tiffany always stayed by our side under the label of being his childhood friend. He had lost both of his parents and was all alone, and Jason always thought she was pitiful and deserved sympathy. He arranged a job for her, bought her a house. Whenever we traveled, she had a spot. Even when he bought me gifts during business trips, there was always something for her. Even our wedding anniversaries were celebrated as a group of 3. When I raised objections, he always said, "She's all alone in this world. I only see her as a sister." He told me that as a woman, I should understand how hard life is for another woman. He used moral guilt to force me to accept his choices. Until one day, Tiffany and I were kidnapped. The kidnappers made Jason choose one of us. Tiffany cried and said she was pregnant with his child. Only then did I realize that all along, under the guise of being like siblings, the two of them had been betraying me behind my back. As the kidnappers urged him, Jason didn't hesitate and chose Tiffany. The way he looked at me was calm, yet cruel. "Lena, you grew up loved by your parents. You even married me. Your life has already been fulfilled enough. Tiffany only has me in this world, and now she carries my child. I can't leave her." As I screamed and cried for help, he carried Tiffany away in large strides without ever looking back. Now that I get to live this life again, all I want is to stay far, far away from this disgusting pair. On the lawn decorated with heart-shaped flower petals, Jason knelt down on one knee, gazing at Tiffany with deep affection. "God has given me a second chance. Will you marry me?" Tiffany stared at him in shock, her eyes wide open. She covered her mouth in disbelief, tears rolling down her cheeks as she choked back sobs and nodded repeatedly. "I will." Jason, thrilled, put the ring on her finger. The two of them kissed passionately in front of everyone. My best friend was furious on my behalf. "Wait, wasn't Jason going to propose to you today? Why did he suddenly break up and propose to Tiffany?" "Yeah, and that ring, wasn't it sized for Lena? It's obviously too big for Tiffany's finger." What the hell is going on? Jason and Lena were together for 5 years. Just last week, he even contacted us to say he'd be proposing today. What is happening? Wasn't Tiffany just Jason's childhood friend? Didn't he always say he saw her as a sister? When did they start dating? In our last life, when Jason proposed to me, he had invited all our mutual friends to witness the proposal. This time, he suddenly changed his target, which of course raised questions. Whispers and gossip buzzed through the crowd. After quite a while, Jason and Tiffany finally pulled apart, a string of saliva still connecting their lips. Everyone looked confused and intrigued, filled with curiosity and gossip. I turned away in disgust. Jason's friend stepped forward and asked, confused, "Jason, what the hell is going on? Weren't you going to propose to Lena today?" "That's why we all came, to support you." "What is this?" My best friend also stepped up, frowning as she stared at him. "Jason, what are you doing kissing another woman in public like that? Where does that leave Lena?" Jason calmly swept his gaze across the crowd. Jason held tightly onto Tiffany's hand and raised his voice. "I already said it just now. I've broken up with Lena. The one I love now is Tiffany, and she's the one I'm going to marry." After saying that, he looked at me with a calm expression. "Lena, all of our friends are here today. Let's just be clear with each other. After today, let's part ways peacefully. No more clinging to one another. How about it?" It sounded like he was asking, but his eyes carried a warning. I let out a cold laugh. A cheating piece of trash. Thank you for walking into the dumpster on your own. I didn't bother with Jason's instantly darkened expression. I called my best friend and headed straight to a newly opened viral restaurant. Getting away from trash like him and her was something worth celebrating. My friend slung an arm around my shoulder. If you want to cry, just cry. My shoulder's yours. I shook my head. Seeing his true colors sooner rather than later, that's something to laugh about. I'm not crying. Everyone around gave me a thumbs up. Honestly, I always thought Jason's relationship with Tiffany was suspicious. Just like a sister, huh? What kind of couple brings their sister to eat at a Valentine's Day couple's dinner? Only Lena has that kind of patience. If it were me, I would have blown up long ago. Jason's been relying on Lena's connections for years. He used her resources to start a business and become a CEO, and now he turns around and dumps her? Trash is still trash. They had tried to talk sense into me in my past life too, but I had been too deeply in it, convinced that Jason was kind and responsible. Now, I can't help but think, I must have been a complete idiot back then. Halfway through dinner, Jason and his group showed up too. Tiffany walked over, holding a glass of wine in her delicate hand, putting on her soft, helpless act. Lena, she said, to be honest, I've had a crush on Jason for years. I originally wanted to wish you both well, but Jason loves me too. We have mutual feelings. Please bless us. In the past, I used to think Tiffany was gentle, soft-spoken, shy, and insecure. I treated her like a younger sister. But now, all I saw was a fake little damsel act, someone who knew exactly how to use tears and weakness to win sympathy. I still remembered, right before I died in my last life, how she curled up in Jason's arms, looked at me and sneered. Lena, you were just lucky to be born into a good family. You had the resources to help Jason become the successful man he is today. Now, I get to enjoy the benefits. I should be thanking you, really. I worked so hard putting on that show in front of you for so long. From now on, I'll be Mrs. Carter. At this point in time, Jason had already used my resources and connections to build his company and become a rising star in the industry. When I said nothing, Tiffany immediately let the tears fall. Lena, we really love each other. Can't you just let us be happy? Seeing her cry, Jason walked over with a dark expression. Lena, I was the one who broke up with you. If you're mad, come at me. What do you get out of bullying Tiffany? I stared at them coldly. If you don't need your eyes, you should donate them. My best friend crossed her arms and shot back. Lena hasn't said a single word. Which part of that looked like bullying to you? So what, crying automatically makes someone right now? Jason frowned and looked down at Tiffany. What's going on? Tiffany leaned into his side, her voice trembling. It's all my fault. You chose me, not her. She must be really upset. Please don't blame Lena. Jason's expression twisted in anger. He slammed his fist on the table in front of me. Lena, Tiffany is gentle and kind. She has a soft nature. And you, because you have more friends, you think it's okay to gang up and bully her? Why didn't I see before how vicious you are? I'm so glad I broke up with you. This lifetime, I'll only marry Tiffany. Give up already. I know it's hard for you to let go, but stop deliberately pulling these stunts to get my attention. I'm not coming back. His hand hit a cup on the table, knocking it over. The drink spilled all over me. I frowned at the mess, then looked up at his face and that never-ending mouth of his. I raised my hand and slapped him hard across the face. Jason's eyes widened in disbelief. Lena, you dare hit me? I looked at him in pure disgust. I was just sitting here eating dinner. You bark like a dog here and I'm not allowed to hit you? In the past, I was always gentle and composed in front of him, especially considering that his family background wasn't as privileged as mine. I always tried to preserve his dignity in public. I never raised my voice at him, not even once. But now, he meant nothing to me anymore. Of course, I wouldn't care about his pride. Jason raised his hand in fury, ready to strike me, but a firm hand grabbed his wrist and flung it aside. I looked up in surprise. It was Sean. His gaze swept over me with concern, and when he noticed that the front of my shirt was soaked from spilled wine, he took off his blazer and gently draped it over my shoulders. Are you hurt? I slowly shook my head, my emotions tangled. Jason glanced at me, then at Sean. Lena, and you still claim you're not hung up on me? What, did you bring someone here to put on a show? Trying to make me jealous? I frowned, puzzled. What the hell are you talking about? Jason gave a smug, knowing smirk. You were with me for 5 years, and you always kept your distance from other men. And now, of all restaurants, we just happened to run into you here? And suddenly you've got some guy acting close to you? You're obviously putting on a show to make me regret breaking up with you, aren't you? He shook his head and sneered. I can't believe you're using such petty tricks now, but feelings can't be controlled. I'm not coming back to you, ever. Just give it up. I rolled my eyes. Delusion is a disease. I suggest you get it treated as soon as possible. Without waiting for a response, I called my friends and walked out of the parking lot. Standing outside, I looked at the man in front of me, handsome face, broad shoulders, long legs, and pursed my lips. Sean, thank you. I've got something to take care of, so I'll be going now. As I watched his tall figure walk away, I swallowed the words I'd wanted to say. When I got home, my parents asked what had happened between me and Jason. Apparently, someone had uploaded the proposal video online. People were blasting Jason for being a scumbag who cheated on his girlfriend on the day of their engagement. Others claimed true love knows no bounds, and that the one unloved was the real third wheel. The internet exploded. The whole social circle had heard the story. My parents were furious. My dad cursed Jason for being a lowlife. They'd never been fully supportive of my relationship with Jason anyway, and had warned me before that his feelings for Tiffany weren't normal. They told me to be cautious, but I hadn't listened. I ended up paying the price. My mom wrapped her arms around me. My daughter's amazing. There are so many men out there better than Jason. The Shen family just called and asked if we were still interested in a marriage alliance. Thinking back to what happened at the restaurant, I nodded. Sure. I agree. My dad raised an eyebrow. Agree? You're not even going to think it over? The Shen family and ours were evenly matched in status. Sean Shen was upright and disciplined, had great work ethic, and was definitely a rare catch for a political marriage. But beyond that, there was another reason, one from my previous life. Thinking of what Sean had done back then, I felt a little conflicted inside. My mom asked again, Sweetie, you're really okay with a marriage alliance now? I've told you before, Sean is not only good-looking, but also smart and decent. He doesn't mess around with women. If you married him, you'd never be bullied. I nodded. Yes, I'm okay with it. Now that the marriage was settled, it was time to cut all remaining ties with Jason. The next day, I brought a real estate agent and a cleaning crew to my large condo. Back when Jason was starting his company, he didn't have the money to buy a place, so he'd been living in my apartment all along. As soon as I walked in, he was picking vegetables out for Tiffany. When he saw me, his face instantly darkened, and he slammed his chopsticks on the table. Lena, do you have any manners? Who just walks into someone else's house without knocking? I laughed out loud. Have you been living here so long that you forgot this is my apartment? Why would I need to knock to enter my own home? Jason's face shifted. He really had stayed here long enough to start thinking of the place as his. I told the agent to take a look around. Everywhere he's lived in, I consider filthy now. Better to sell the place and start fresh. Jason blocked the agent. What are you people doing here? We're just viewing and photographing the apartment. The agent replied, Unless you've done something in this place that can't be seen. Tiffany frowned, her gaze toward Jason filled with suspicion and scrutiny. This place doesn't belong to you, Jason? Jason coughed awkwardly. No, it's not mine, but with what I'm worth now, I can easily afford a condo like this. Don't worry about it. Tiffany let out a breath of relief. You're a big company owner now. I trust your ability to make money. Jason's confidence swelled. He patted her head. Relax. You became my woman yesterday, and who knows, maybe you're already pregnant with my child. I'll make sure you have a good life. I had no interest in hearing another word from them. I walked past them, heading toward the bedroom. But Jason suddenly shoved me hard. Who said you could go in there? Caught off guard, my forehead slammed against the corner of the table. My head spun. I steadied myself and touched the aching spot. My hand came away covered in bright red blood. It was still dripping from my forehead. Jason took a step toward me. For a brief second, panic flashed in his eyes, but then he froze. We'll move out. You don't need to go in there. The real estate agent nearby, clearly alarmed, quickly grabbed a first aid kit and sprayed an antiseptic on my wound. I stared at Jason's guilty expression. Why can't I see my own home? I shoved open the bedroom door and froze. Everything inside had changed. My belongings were piled in a corner like garbage, some filthy and torn beyond recognition. My cups were tossed into the kitchen trash can. They had taken over my house and treated my things like trash. I trembled with rage. Take all your things and get the hell out. Jason looked annoyed. It's just an apartment, Lena. My company's earning more and more. I could buy a place like this anytime. If it weren't for you insisting I stay here back then, do you think I'd have wanted to live here? I couldn't help but laugh in disbelief. Then, go now. Back then, he'd said he didn't have much money. When he found out I had a luxury condo downtown, he claimed it was close to his company and asked to move in. I had respected his pride and never brought it up again, but I never imagined he'd have the nerve to flip the truth like this. I watched him pack his expensive suits and watches and sneered. I brought all the gifts you gave me. As for the watch I gave you, Jason, don't tell me you're planning to take that too. I kicked a small suitcase over to his feet. Jason's face turned stiff. The watch in his hand was the birthday present I'd bought him last year for over $100,000. With a stiff motion, Jason threw the watch into the drawer. Of course not. I won't touch anything you bought me. I won't keep a single thing that came from you. But as he started packing his clothes, he realized almost everything was something I had bought him. High-end business attire, accessories. Back when he first started his business, he had no money at all, so I'd covered nearly everything he wore. By the time he finished, he couldn't even fill a suitcase. Tiffany glanced at the display case of watches, more than 10, each worth tens of thousands. She bit her lip. Lena, once you give something away, it's like water spilled. Trying to take it back now is kind of embarrassing, isn't it? I let out a scoff. Don't tell me you actually thought about taking them back? Jason, clearly insulted, said coldly, Sure, you bought me a lot of things, but what I gave you was all of my love. Real love is priceless, far more than money can measure. I nodded. Right, you're noble and superior. Since you hold yourself above these material things, then by all means, take nothing. I turned to the cleaning crew who had followed me in. Everything in here, watches, clothes, anything you like, if you want it, take it. I'm giving it all to you willingly. The 5 or 6 cleaners beamed with joy and bowed to thank me. Each of them took 2 watches. They emptied the wardrobe, even took the flower pots. Jason's face turned black. Tiffany looked downright jealous as her gaze followed the watches being carried away. Jason angrily kicked the suitcase I'd brought toward the cleaners. Here, take this too. One of the cleaners opened it curiously, then quickly backed away in disappointment after rummaging through it. What kind of junk is this? Handcrafted flowers? Plastic rings? Not even worth listing on a second-hand site. Back then, I knew Jason didn't have much money and was too proud to admit it, so I told him that as long as the gift came from the heart, it didn't matter what it was. As a result, every birthday and anniversary, he gave me rings made of twisted wire or roses folded out of colored paper. Now, even he couldn't bear to look at the gifts he once gave me. He grabbed Tiffany and left in a hurry. When they got to the parking lot, Jason turned and glared at me. Lena, where's my car? I replied coolly. I sold it. You sold it? I've been driving that car for so long, I'm used to it. Do you have to be so heartless? I found it funny. Jason, that car was mine. Just because you drove it for a while, did you really start thinking it belonged to you? His stunned expression told me he actually had started to believe it. Tiffany, standing beside him, looked pale one moment and flushed the next, her brows tightly furrowed. Jason, the apartment and the car both belonged to Lena. But don't you own a company now? Aren't you supposed to be doing well? At first I wondered the same thing. If the house and car were mine, where had Jason's money gone? Then I realized all the luxury clothes and jewelry Tiffany wore were brand names. Meanwhile, everything he gave me, the actual girlfriend, was cheap plastic. Turns out, not loving someone really does show in the smallest things. Jason leaned down to whisper something to Tiffany, and she touched the necklace around her neck. Only then did her expression soften. Right before I drove off, Jason looked at me with arrogance. Lena, you were just lucky to be born into a rich family. I built my company from scratch. I'm the boss now. 30 years the river flows east, 30 years it flows west. One day you'll come crawling back to me. I didn't waste time responding to that childish nonsense. I hit the gas and sped away. When I got home, I saw Sean waiting at the gate. Tall, long-legged, with broad shoulders and a slim waist, his handsome face calm and composed. When he saw me, his eyes lit up. He pressed his lips together and asked, a little cautiously, "You really agreed to marry me?" The look on his face reminded me of the day before our wedding in the previous life. Sean had come to see me too, back then looking haggard and silent. He'd also asked carefully, "If I said I wanted to marry you, would you be willing?" After I died, my soul wandered for a long time. I saw Jason and Tiffany get married and have kids. I saw Jason's company collapse under pressure and go bankrupt. I watched him get diagnosed with stomach cancer and die. And I saw Sean, standing quietly in front of my grave, confessing feelings he'd kept hidden for years. That's when I realized Sean had loved me for a decade. We were classmates in high school. Back then, we used to talk often, but we drifted apart in college. Even so, he had always remembered me. He even investigated what happened during the kidnapping, learned how Jason abandoned me to save Tiffany, and secretly took revenge for me. He brought Jason's company to ruin. The men who humiliated me were sentenced to death. Throughout the 10 years my soul wandered, Sean never got married. Instead, he visited my grave every year and sat there all day. Snapping out of my thoughts, I looked at the man in front of me, restraining deep emotions in his eyes, and felt a wave of emotion rise inside me. I stepped forward and slowly hugged him, whispering firmly, "Yes, I'll marry you, not as a cold, calculated alliance, but because it comes from real feelings." Sean's body stiffened, then trembled slightly when he heard my words. I looked up at him with sincerity. "I don't love Jason anymore. I want to try loving you. I want to build a real life together. I want to grow old with you. Will you?" I watched him nervously, and his eyes lit up with joy. He held me tightly and said, "I do. I absolutely do." From then on, both families started planning the wedding. Sean and I met often. At first, things were a little unfamiliar, but we quickly grew comfortable. I began to discover how much we had in common. He was gentle, patient, and thoughtful, a natural at guiding others with warmth. When I faced challenges at work, he offered expert advice. During holidays and special occasions, he found ways to surprise me with gifts I actually liked, or even lit fireworks that spelled out my name in the sky. Our relationship blossomed quickly. Our friends often said we were a perfectly matched couple, equal in strength and love. I was genuinely excited for the upcoming wedding. That day at work, Jason suddenly burst into the office, his eyes full of fury like he wanted to tear me apart. "Lena, just because you can't have me, you're trying to destroy my company now? How can you be so vicious? I already told you, I'm only going to be with Tiffany in this lifetime. How far are you planning to take this?" I looked at him, confused. We hadn't seen each other in 2 months, and he looked noticeably worn out, agitated, and haggard. We hadn't had any contact at all during this time, so I honestly had no idea what he was talking about. Seeing I didn't respond, Jason let out a cold laugh. "Still not admitting it, huh? Just because I dumped you, you went behind my back and pressured all my suppliers to stop working with me, told the banks to deny me loans. And now you want to bankrupt my company? Is this your twisted way of getting me back?" He sneered. "Is this all you've got, Lena? Petty, backhanded tricks?" I raised my hand and cut him off. "You think too highly of yourself. First, I didn't do any of those things. Second, I have zero interest in getting back with you. Don't flatter yourself." "Then how do you explain it?" he snapped. "Why won't anyone work with my company now? Why do I lose every bid?" I smirked. "You tell me." Our family business, the Lin Group, is a well-known major enterprise. After Jason started dating me, from launching his company, securing suppliers, negotiating loans, everything was backed by me. People didn't trust him for his own abilities. They trusted him because he was associated with me and the Lin family. With the Lin Group behind him, things went smoothly by default. Now his video proposing to Tiffany had gone viral, and everyone in the business circle knew about my engagement to Sean. Anyone with half a brain would realize that clinging to Jason meant offending the Lin family. Naturally, no one wanted to help him anymore. His company was too small to survive a financial storm. Of course, the banks wouldn't lend to him. And as for losing every bid, that was simply because his company wasn't strong enough to compete. Without a major backer and without real capabilities, a decline was inevitable. Sometimes, people mistake their platform for their own ability. After hearing this, Jason finally seemed to grasp the truth. He gritted his teeth. As long as we part ways peacefully, I'm fine. Just don't sabotage me anymore. I gave a cold chuckle. I want that even more than you do. So stop flattering yourself. I don't have the time or interest to mess with your life. If there's nothing else, please leave. I have work to do. Jason opened his mouth like he wanted to say more, but the words got stuck in his throat. Then, hesitantly, he said, "Can your company give us a collaboration project?" I thought he had already left, but to my surprise, he was still standing there, his face flushed, asking for business. I looked at him without emotion. I'm a professional. Project partnerships depend solely on the strength of the company, and yours isn't exactly competitive. There are plenty of companies stronger than yours. Realizing what I meant, Jason walked out of the office red-faced, full of shame and humiliation. I turned back to my work with a clear mind. That Friday night, there was a birthday gala for one of the industry's most influential figures. I put on my gown and left early. When Sean saw me, his eyes lit up instantly. "You look stunning." I looked up at the tall, long-legged man standing under the moonlight with his handsome, refined features. Rising on my toes, I kissed him gently on the lips. My fiancé is pretty handsome himself. The banquet was packed with elites and socialites, the air thick with wine and laughter. Sean and I moved through the crowd gracefully. Then, suddenly, I heard a commotion nearby. I raised an eyebrow. It was Jason and Tiffany. Right then, Tiffany was fuming, yelling at a kid no older than 7 or 8. "Are you blind or what? You don't even watch where you're walking? Do you know how much this dress costs? I paid $500,000 for it. This is the first time I've worn it, and you spilled wine on it. Can you afford to pay for it?" The kid was wearing pajamas, looking like he had a bit of a temper himself. "You're the one who's blind. Your whole family is blind." Furious at being yelled at, Tiffany shoved the child roughly. No manners at all. What kind of wild kid comes to a banquet not even wearing proper clothes? Jason, clearly supporting her, stepped forward. He was short on funds lately and more irritable than usual. "Where are your parents? This dress cost $50,000. Let them pay up." The little boy, after being kicked, jumped up and kicked them right back. Jason grabbed him by the arm. "Where are your manners? Who raised you? Where's security? Do they just let anyone in here?" "What's wrong with my grandson's manners?" A deep, authoritative voice echoed across the banquet hall. The host of the event stepped forward, his expression stern as he slowly approached. His eyes landed on the boy Jason was grabbing, full of unspoken warning. "And who are you, thinking you can yell at my grandson?" Only then did the crowd realize the little boy was this industry titan's grandson, and apparently he was very much adored. The child had been asleep upstairs and came down in his pajamas after being woken up by the noise. That was when he accidentally bumped into someone holding a glass of wine and splashed it onto Tiffany's dress. "Isn't that Jason Carter, the guy who went viral for that public proposal a while back?" "Yeah, the one who broke up with the Lynn heiress. That girl next to him must be the new girlfriend. Wow, what a downgrade. She really doesn't know how to read the room. Does she think everyone at an event like this is just some nobody?" I heard Jason had to pull every string he had just to get an invite tonight, and now he's just shot himself in the foot. Let's see who dares to work with him after this. As whispers and side glances spread across the room, Jason and Tiffany both went pale. They immediately bent down and apologized. The child, already upset from being shoved by Tiffany, was even more furious now. He started punching and kicking them nonstop. Jason and Tiffany didn't even dare to dodge. The wrath of the host was more terrifying than a child's fists. After the boy tired himself out, the host waved his hand and had someone hand over a $50,000 check. Then he ordered the security guards to throw the two of them out. Jason, completely disregarding his pride, started groveling for forgiveness, begging the host to give him another chance. But no one in the room paid him any attention. Sean wrapped his arm around my waist, shielding me from the sight. Don't look at him. He'd been getting more and more jealous ever since we made our relationship official. I clung to his arm and teased him. Everyone's watching. I'm just people watching like everyone else. My fiancé is so handsome. Right now, I only have eyes for you. No need to be jealous. Sure enough, I saw the tips of his ears turn red. Just as we were walking out of the banquet hall, Jason rushed over. Lena, please help me. Say a word to the host on my behalf. I stared at him in disbelief. Summer, Jason, are you seriously asking me to help you apologize? Have you completely lost your mind? He glanced at Sean and then said with misplaced confidence, You agreed to that family alliance because you still have feelings for me, didn't you? Look, if you're willing to help me smooth things over and get through this crisis, I'm willing to keep things civil. We can still be friends. Sean narrowed his eyes and gripped my hand even tighter. I interlocked our fingers and held them up right in front of Jason's face. Jason, you keep assuming I still have lingering feelings for you. Honestly, you need to see a doctor. Chronic narcissism is a real disorder. My fiancé is more handsome than you, richer than you, smarter than you, more responsible and more loyal. What makes you think I'd ever give up someone like him for a cheating scumbag like you? This is the last time I'll say it. I don't feel anything for you anymore. The man I like now is Sean. We agreed to part ways peacefully, so stop pestering me. Stick to your word. Ignoring Jason's crushed expression, I turned around and left with Sean. When we got home, Sean was still staring at me with a dazed look on his face. I waved my hand in front of him. Earth to Sean, are you still with me? He locked eyes with mine. Say it again. I tilted my head. Say what again? He pursed his lips and asked, What you said earlier, do you really mean it? That you like me? I wrapped both arms around his neck and leaned in, looking him straight in the eyes. I really, really like you, Sean. You know me. I'm stubborn. No one can force me to do anything I don't want to do. If I say I like you, then I do. Even back in my last life, during those 10 long years, I couldn't stay indifferent. I had watched him sit by my grave crying, fighting to avenge me. My heart had already started beating for him. Maybe it wasn't just liking him. Maybe I'd fallen in love with him. Sean didn't answer me with words. He pulled me into a sudden, fiery kiss, full of heat and desperation. Gradually, I felt a warmth rise in my chest, something almost poetic. I've finally waited long enough for you, he murmured against my lips. Lena, I love you so much. I've loved you for so many years. Hearing him confess the feelings he'd hidden all those years, I felt my heart tighten painfully. But thank God, in this life, we would finally be together. As our wedding day drew closer, my relationship with Sean only deepened. One afternoon, my best friend gossiped with me. See? Sean really is the one for you. You wouldn't believe how miserable Jason is now. That's when I found out that ever since the banquet incident, Jason had been frantically organizing drinking parties and calling in favors, trying to find someone who could help him get an apology meeting with the host. But all his efforts had failed. Everyone knew he had offended the wrong person, and no one dared to work with him anymore. When his bank loan came due, he couldn't repay it. His company filed for bankruptcy. These days, he drowned himself in alcohol, spiraling into a shadow of his former self. I wasn't surprised. Very few people could succeed on their own from scratch, especially someone like Jason, who was blindly arrogant. He always believed he made it on his own, without any help from the Lin family. Now, he finally understood the truth. But what did surprise me was Tiffany showing up to find me. Gone was the gentle, delicate image she always put on. Her face was cold and composed as she slowly rubbed her belly. I'm pregnant. I raised an eyebrow. It's not mine. Why are you telling me? Tiffany smiled faintly. I haven't told Jason yet. Then she tilted her chin and looked at me. I know you still have feelings for Jason. Don't rush to deny it. After 5 years together, no one can let go that easily. Lena, you're someone who loves deeply. I'm willing to get an abortion and leave Jason if you agree to one condition. I couldn't help but ask, what condition? Give me 10 million. I'll disappear from Jason's life forever and never show up in front of either of you again. I stared at her, stunned. Weren't you his childhood sweetheart? Didn't you love him? She curled her lip in disdain. Only because I was broke. Jason's always been arrogant. He loves weak, helpless women because it makes him feel capable. I stayed with him because I needed someone to pay my bills. I was waiting for him to marry you, get rich, and give me a better life. But then he proposed to me instead. I figured, fine, he has a company, a house, and a car. Marrying him wouldn't be bad. Who knew the house and car were yours? And now his company's bankrupt. I asked him to buy me clothes, and he called me wasteful. A man like that, why would I stay with him? So if you give me 10 million, Jason's all yours. I crossed my arms and leaned back in my chair. You just listed everything wrong with Jason, so why would I even want him? With my family background, I can easily find a man 100 times better than him. He's a cheating scumbag. What makes you think I'd still be interested? Tiffany's expression froze and her brows furrowed tightly. Don't ever come to me again, I added coldly. I don't want anything more to do with either of you. But the next day, Jason stormed into my office, pointing at me and shouting, "You bullied Tiffany. You pushed her so hard she lost the baby." I guess Tiffany must have made something up and blamed it on me. Seeing the red rims around her eyes, I let out a cold laugh. What does she have that's even worth bullying? Jason, have you completely lost your mind? If not you, then who else? You met with her yesterday, didn't you? So what if we met? I snapped. Meeting her means I bullied her? Maybe she didn't even want the baby and got rid of it herself. You're lying, Jason shouted. Tiffany is timid and kind. There's no way she'd do something like that. It must have been you. Without a word, I pulled out my phone and played a recording. Let's hear what your timid and kind Tiffany really said yesterday. Thankfully, I'd recorded the entire conversation in advance. The audio played clearly. Because I was broke. Jason's always been arrogant. He loves weak girls so he can feel capable. Jason froze. I only stayed with Jason because I needed someone to pay for my expenses. I'm willing to get rid of the baby and leave him, as long as you agree to one condition. Give me 10 million and I'll walk away from Jason forever. I'll never show up in front of either of you again. Hearing Tiffany's words from the recording, Jason's face turned pale, inch by inch. His fists clenched tightly. That liar. She really got rid of my child, and all this time she played me like a fool. Without another word, he stormed out of my office. I didn't bother with either of them after that. All my attention was on preparing for my wedding. Jason couldn't believe that the gentle, sweet childhood friend he had cared for all these years would do something like that. When he went home to confront her, Tiffany was packing up the last few pieces of jewelry he had bought for her, the only things of real value left in the apartment. Jason, furious, demanded an explanation. Tiffany dropped the act, looked at him with disgust, and mocked him for being useless, always chasing rich people for connections, thinking too highly of himself without even knowing his own worth. Jason roared back at her, yelling about everything he had done for her, how much he had cared. How could she betray him like this? Tiffany sneered, "Lena treated you so well and you still dumped her. Why shouldn't I lie to you?" That one sentence hit the sorest spot in Jason's heart, the one truth he never dared face. In a rage, the two of them started fighting. Tiffany called the police. By the time Jason was released from the station, she had already disappeared with the last of the valuables. Jason went back to his dingy apartment and sank into the couch, drinking every day. As he replayed the events of both lives in his mind, he finally realized his previous success had all been because of me. Without my resources and network, his company would never have grown so smoothly. Thinking of me, regret and guilt flooded his heart. Deep down, he had always known that the people who cooperated with him only did so because of the Lin family. That's why he constantly felt inferior. And the more inferior he felt, the more he wanted to feel superior in front of me. Even though I never acted superior around him, he still needed to prove something. That's why he secretly hooked up with Tiffany, chasing the thrill of betrayal. While I gave him designer gifts, he repaid me with trinkets and cheap tokens. Even when we were kidnapped, he chose Tiffany over me, leaving me to suffer and scream for help. As if in doing so, I would finally be beneath him. In this lifetime, he wanted to prove he could succeed without me, that he could build his own empire. But he was wrong. He thought he was outstanding, when in reality he was arrogant and blind. He thought he had found true love, but it turned out to be a lie dressed in fake gentleness. Only I had truly loved him. And now, he regretted it. He remembered how soft-hearted I used to be. Maybe if he begged, I would forgive him. Maybe I would come back. The day of my wedding arrived. The sun was shining bright and 2 rainbows appeared in the sky. Sean and I stood together under the witness of the officiant and made our vows, promising to support each other through every joy and hardship, walking side by side into the future. After the ceremony, as the guests slowly left, Jason showed up in a wrinkled but still decently clean suit. He didn't say a word, he just knelt down and broke into sobs. "Lena," he cried, "I was wrong. I finally see it now. We were the ones who were truly meant to be. Please, forgive me." Sean pulled me tightly into his arms, possessive and protective. "My wife doesn't recycle trash. You want to keep your legs? Then get lost." Jason looked up at me, his eyes still filled with some twisted kind of longing. "Lena, believe it or not, in our past life, we were husband and wife." I stepped closer, looked down at him and said coldly, "You mean the husband who left his wife in the hands of criminals?" Jason's face crumbled. He collapsed to the ground. You knew." After that, Jason never came to see me again. Later, I heard that he'd been diagnosed with stomach cancer. He had no money for treatment. By the time someone finally found him in his apartment, his body had already begun to decay. As for Tiffany, I heard she jumped from one sugar daddy to another and eventually got beaten up by a jealous wife. Her face was ruined, her leg broken. But none of that had anything to do with me anymore. Sean and I welcomed our first child, a baby boy who looked just like his father. And life was just beginning. We still had so many beautiful days ahead.